Hello everyone, welcome and thank you very much for attending our webinar on meaningful experiences in sport today. And thank you very much to iCoachKids for the invitation and to Barnaby and Gary for coordinating things to get this happening. As Declan mentioned, I'm Tim Fletcher, and along with Stephanie Beni, we'll share some of the background information on meaningful experiences in sport. Specifically, we'll give an overview of some of the work we've done so far on meaningful experiences in physical education, and how that work has informed some of our current thinking on meaningful experiences in sport, which will be the focus of Deirdre and Richard's part of the presentation. To provide a quick background, our first major project focusing on meaningful experiences came from Deirdre and I wanting to develop and articulate pedagogies that we could use as teacher educators to support pre-service teachers in learning to prioritise meaningful experiences for the students that they would end up teaching in schools. Stephanie was one of those students in the early years of that project. And over time, we were able to come to a shared understanding of some of the things that we could do to support pre-service teachers learning about prioritising meaningful experiences. And these were shared in the form of two main papers, one on the pedagogical principles that support pre-service teachers in learning about meaningful physical education, and one where we analyse pre-service teachers' articulation of their learning. So from that work with pre-service teachers, we were encouraged to expand this into school settings, and that required a slightly different pedagogical approach, and that has been much of our focus for the past several years. This began with Stephanie and Kira Griffin, who at the time were both graduate students and part-time teachers, experimenting with and adapting some of the ideas from that original LAMP project that we had with pre-service teachers. And their findings informed a preliminary set of principles that shaped the initial development or blueprint of the meaningful physical education approach. And currently we're finalising our analysis from a 2-year study with 2 cohorts of teachers in Canada and a smaller sample of exemplary teachers in Saudi Arabia. And we'll share some insights from these works throughout the presentation. Our preliminary ideas about the meaningful physical education approach were just published in this book. My copy arrived yesterday, which includes some first-person case studies written by teachers who have tried to use it in school settings. That includes Stephanie, as well as some teacher educators who have taken the ideas from our first project and used it with their pre-service teachers, and Richard is one of those teacher educators. In turning our attention to the substance of the meaningful physical education approach and the LAMP project, we see the main idea, or the elevator pitch if you like, being the development of an approach to physical education and sport where the facilitation of meaningful experiences for learners is the prioritised filter for pedagogical decision making. So meaningful experiences becomes the focus of the teacher's or coach's vision and the hinge upon how decisions are made from planning through to instruction and assessment. In terms of justifying or providing a rationale for a focus on meaningful experiences, we're drawn to the ways in which meaningful experiences can enhance an individual's quality of life. So it's not only about playing more or doing better, it's about the quality of an experience, the relationships, the feelings, the playfulness, the emotional attachments to and experiences of movement and its context, and the ways in which these make our lives better. Now, a convenient byproduct of these types of experiences, that is, those that are intrinsically motivating, for example, which can include meaningfulness, are also more likely to lead to lifelong participation when compared with those experiences that are extrinsically motivating. In terms of conceptualizing meaningful experiences, we need to define the two main terms, meaningful and experiences. And in thinking about the term meaningful, we use Kretschmar's definition, who in turn drew from Eleanor Matheny, to describe meaningful experiences as those that are full of personal significance. Recent advances in positive psychology also suggest that meaningfulness has 3 main components or elements: a motivational element related to purpose, an emotional element related to feelings of significance, and a cognitive element that is related to coherence and the linking of experiences. Now, this idea of coherence is also evident in how we conceptualize the term experience. We drew from Dewey, who talks about experiences consisting of two key aspects: interaction and continuity. So interactions can occur with a variety of things that could be people, artifacts, culture, environment, equipment, rules, so on and so forth. And the significance or meaning of these interactions then become understood through reconciling them with past, present, and future experiences. And that represents a continuity. Apologies for my family interactions going on in the background here. Now, a meaningful experience is not necessarily a good experience. Something that's meaningful can be negative, it could be hurtful, and so on. Now, of course, we want to focus on prioritizing those experiences that are positive, and Dewey would call these educative, in that they promote further seeking of or engagement with or continuation of similar or like experiences. We'll now move on to consider how some of these ideas inform an outline of the approach and the selection of appropriate pedagogies that align with that conceptualization. As we said earlier, the main idea or objective of meaningful physical education is to support teachers and coaches in placing meaningful experiences as the main filter or governor for their decision-making. And in turn, we hope that by learners becoming aware of what they find meaningful and possibly meaningless, that they are able to advocate for themselves and others in seeking further opportunities for participation because they see these experiences as life-enhancing. In that conceptual paper and our position that the main overarching purpose of physical education is democratic transformation, we felt that meaningful experiences are best facilitated by teachers using pedagogies that could be considered democratic and reflective, the main elements being reflected in what you see there on the slide. And these are explained further in that paper that we showed previously. Now, these approaches seem to work well in that they are informed by the conceptualization of meaningful experiences. And there's evidence that these pedagogies help to facilitate experiences that students describe as meaningful. Also, what does that mean? It means that the pedagogies just described help students have fun, interact positively with others, experience optimal levels of challenge, develop motor competence, and see that what they are learning is personally relevant. And knowledge of these features can help students become aware of what they find meaningful and also support teachers in generating discussion about other things that support meaningfulness or could be described as meaningful that are not on this list. So to be clear, we see this list as an excellent starting point, but not necessarily an exhaustive list or inventory of what typically constitutes a meaningful experience in physical education and sport for young people. These features are also very integrated and should not be thought of as a checklist. And evidence of these features of meaningful experiences have been reported in this major review of literature that we published several years ago. I'm now going to hand over to Stephanie, who's going to describe some of the work that she did, as well as that of Kira Griffin and Andy Vasily. So Stephanie, I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you, Tim, and thank you everyone for being here today. Okay, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about, as Tim mentioned, some of the evidence that's supported the development and the refinement of the meaningful PE approach, essentially what took us from that 2017 review of literature to sort of the approach that we've developed and where it is today. So in the first article here, next slide please, Tim. This is actually coming from a study that I conducted in my own classroom as a teacher studying my own teaching practice. And basically, I was really intrigued by this idea of meaningfulness and wanting to promote those types of experiences for my students, but having questions about how we could actually do that and wondering if these features that we outlined in our review of literature would be a good starting point. So that was basically the question that I was asking. And so I worked with my students over a period of 8 weeks and attempted to use those features as a starting point. And basically what we found from this study was that those features did provide a good starting point for making pedagogical decisions that were helping to prioritize meaningfulness for my students. I also found that it was really important for me to commit to prioritizing meaningfulness, because as a teacher, there can be so many competing demands, so many things that you want to accomplish for your students, that making meaning a priority was very important. This study also really began to highlight the importance of some of those democratic pedagogies that Tim was talking about. So the need for autonomy support, for allowing students opportunities to make some choices and be involved in decision making. And lastly, the study highlighted the need to consider meaningfulness both in the short term, but also the long term. So some of that immediate enjoyment, but also those opportunities to work towards something that was bigger through goal setting and things like that. The next paper is actually a part of the same study, but basically what we've done in this paper is sort of provide a feature by feature breakdown of how I tried to promote social interaction, fun, challenge, personal relevance, all of these things, and sort of the specific strategies that we used. So I should mention that all of these articles are freely accessible on our website, meaningfulpe.wordpress.com. So you could definitely access them there if you're interested in learning more. Next slide, please. So this study is actually something that was happening sort of around the same time as the study that I just mentioned from my practice by a graduate student in Ireland who is also a teacher, Kira Griffin, and she was doing something very similar, bringing meaningful PE into her classroom, trying to use those features as sort of a starting point. And again, very similar findings from this study as well, beginning to give us some insight into some of the pedagogies that might promote meaningful PE, especially now a focus on those reflective pedagogies, goal setting, engaging students in reflective activities, whether that's written reflections, verbal reflections, and those types of things. More recently, we've had the opportunity to work with Andy Vasily and his colleagues at KAUST International School in Saudi Arabia. So basically what Andy and his colleagues were aiming to do was to take students through an individual pursuits unit. Next slide, please, where they were working particularly on, in this case, cycling. And basically what they were trying to do was really promote a focus on positive social interactions and personal relevance by introducing students to opportunities in their community to get out and be active on their own outside of school, with sort of a secondary focus on prioritizing challenge. However, as the study progressed, they began to realize that challenge was actually becoming very central to their pedagogical decision making. It was something that allowed them to facilitate conversations with their students about their motor competence, about their social interactions. And it was also something that really tended to promote those personally relevant connections, in that they were able to talk about challenge that students were facing in PE and how it related to challenges in other areas of their lives. So for example, this tweet that we're sharing here comes from their homeroom teacher, who actually took this challenge continuum that was developed in PE and brought it into the classroom. And here they're using it to articulate the types of challenges they're facing in their mathematics lessons. So if you're interested in learning a little bit more about Andy's research, this article is also available on our website. Again, that's meaningfulpe.wordpress.com. The last article I'm going to share with you is actually our most recent publication from our work on meaningful PE. And this is a study where basically we had worked with individual teachers, but we were interested in sort of scaling that up a little bit and saying, can we work with a little bit of a larger group of teachers, still keeping it fairly small so we could prioritize listening to teachers' voices and using qualitative research methods. But basically we decided to pilot this working with a group of 5 primary classroom teachers in Ireland, who we introduced to some ideas about meaningful physical education, and then asked them to sort of implement them with their regular PE lessons over a period of 8 weeks. And so that's what the teachers did. Next slide, please. Basically, in terms of our research, we were sort of interested in asking these questions about what is it from meaningful PE that teachers implement, how do they implement it, and why do they make the implementation decisions that they do. So in terms of what they implemented, very briefly, basically we found that all of the teachers attempted to implement some of the ideas that we introduced them to, and some of the teachers tried to implement most of those ideas. They did this in various ways and to varying extents, but essentially the what and how of their implementation was highly related to why. And the main driving forces behind why teachers were making the decisions they were related first to their perceptions of positive student outcomes. So they wanted to do what they felt was best for their students and promoted their students' learning. And it also related to their prior experiences and beliefs about teaching, about movement, maybe their own experiences as athletes, as coaches, and so on. So highly individualized, but some common threads. So through this research, next slide please, we found support for the meaningful physical education approach with classroom teachers. Importantly, we really found that there's a need to support end users, whether that's teachers or coaches, through the challenges of the implementation process. This study also continued to highlight the importance of vision, of philosophy, and identifying areas of alignment or misalignment between a practitioner's vision and meaningful PE and the philosophy behind that. And of course, this study also pointed to the need for more longitudinal research, which actually brings us to our current work in meaningful PE. So as Tim mentioned, we've just finished up a 2-year study working with 12 teachers here in Canada who implemented the approach over 2 school years, and while we offered them ongoing support and professional development. So we're in the process of writing that research up, and we'll be sharing that soon. We've also begun to analyze the experience of one teacher in an early childhood setting. And of course, we're very excited to now be considering how what we've learned about meaningfulness in physical education may apply to youth sport settings through our Meaningfulness in Youth Sport project. And I will turn it over to Deirdre and Richard, who I know are going to share more about that. Thank you.